Have you ever just been browsing the web for no real reason and decide to go look up a review score for a film or movie or game you really love? I just did this quite recently, actually, and I wanted to see what people and critics thought of a game that made up my summer vacation. Final Fantasy VII. Howdy, I'm Theo. I'm not wearing pants, and I'm carrying a wooden sword. This game is actually near and dear to my heart. It's my first Final Fantasy, and it actually made me want to get involved in other Final Fantasy worlds, just like it did many kids during the late 90s. Now, I'm no 90s kid, and this game wasn't part of my childhood. It made up my mid-teens. But that doesn't matter. It's an amazing experience that anyone with a remote interest in video games should play. And while I know I should respect everyone's opinions, especially on games as massive and divisive as Final Fantasy VII, I can't help myself. There was this hilariously scathing review I saw on Metacritic. Now, before we get started, I do want to note that this person gave Final Fantasy XII and Final Fantasy VII 0 out of 10 scores on Metacritic, however gave Final Fantasy XIII, the most hated game in the series, a perfect 10 out of 10. So odds are he's trolling, and I've now taken his bait. However, for those not familiar with Final Fantasy VII, here's a quick rundown of what you need to know. In Final Fantasy VII, you play as Cloud. Yeah, this hot, angsty blonde dude. Anyway, the game begins with a train. Cloud hops off the train with his allies from the eco-terrorist group Avalanche, Wedge, Biggs, Jesse, and Barrett. Barrett is a cool dude. Anywho, Avalanche is going to a Mako reactor to blow it up, eco-terrorist stuff. Mako energy is the energy from the planet they live on, Gaia. Mako energy is controlled by the Shinra Corporation, who is super corrupt. Because Mako energy is the planet's life force, by exploiting it, Shinra is killing the planet. Avalanche says, hey, that's not cool, and so they become an eco-terrorist group. A lot more happens in this game, but for the sake of spoilers and time, I'll save you the trouble. Just go play the game. Let's start with the opening section. Time to rip off the nostalgia beer goggles. This game is bad. This game is not bad because it has aged poorly. It was never good to begin with. First of all, I'm surprised he knows what beer goggles are. Secondly, don't open your review by just outright saying the game's bad. I got you on Metacritic. I can see your score. Explain why it's bad. Kind of lead us on a little. I hate it when reviewers just outright say, this game is bad. Here is why. Explain. Kind of lead us on. Why don't you? And yeah, I know you can say that, oh, you're just outright saying the review is bad, but this is different because this is a review and not a game, and you already know I'm not going to have a video titled, why Final Fantasy VII is a horrible Final Fantasy game, or whatever I decide to title this, and say, oh, what about this review? It's really good. No, you're going to know that I'm going to talk about a really bad review, so this is different.
The graphics were actually terrible, even in their time. The PlayStation was in no way a weak system ever, but this game seemed to mistake the system for an N64 with cutscene capability and was designed as such. Even for the Nintendo 64, a consumer would balk at the graphic design student quality textures with terrible shading and singular drab colors. Note that the PS1 was a 128-bit system, and the Nintendo 64 was a 64-bit system, and the two had widely different graphic capabilities. Square Enix did not seem to take that into account when making this. Everything looks unpolished and deformed, with even the titles of that year all exceeding it in graphical quality by a significant degree.
This is the section with the most errors, so let's take this nice and slow so I can hit that 10-minute mark and hit those sweet, sweet mid-roll ads. So, those of you that don't know, this statement is completely incorrect. Whenever a Final Fantasy game drops, it always has the best graphics of that current era. So there is no way that Squaresoft, by the way, he called them Square Enix, and at that time they were Squaresoft. You see, there was Squaresoft and Enix, and in 2003 they merged and became one company called Square Enix. So that's, historically incorrect, but whatever. Point is, Squaresoft would not drop a Final Fantasy game that they didn't feel had the best graphical quality possible.
Second, he compares this to an N64 game. Here is an N64 game compared to Final Fantasy VII. This is Yoshi's Story, a much less graphically demanding game released in the same year as Final Fantasy VII. As you can see, Final Fantasy VII is about the same, and considering it's a longer game than Yoshi, it needs more graphical power, which makes it more impressive. As for the shadings and textures, that was the point, you imbecile! It's a bleak, dying world. Also, what about the casino, the gold saucer, and also different parts of Midgar, the main city in this game? They have bright colors and shading everywhere.
This is when he gets to the worst part in his entire review. He says, note that the PS1 is a 128-bit system and the N64 is a 64-bit system. That's incorrect. The N64 is indeed a 64-bit system, thus the name Nintendo 64. However, the PlayStation 1 was a 32-bit system. It came out in 1994, and the N64 came out in 1997, 3 years later, meaning Nintendo had 3 years to beat out the PS1's abilities. And he's confusing the PS1 with the PlayStation 2, which had 128-bit graphics, which came out 6 years after the PS1. I don't know how you're confusing these things. 6 years, 3 years after Final Fantasy VII drops. It's insane to me. Anyone who knows anything about the N64 could tell you it has 64 bits. Wow. It's not that hard to just do a little bit of research before you upload a review, especially when it comes to something as critical as this when you're comparing graphics. In my opinion, the least most important thing in a video game.
I'm going to move on to the next point before I have some actual heart failure. The music also suffers, being below even MIDI quality at points. Even entries of the series on the same system grossly surpassed it. Hell, even Final Fantasy VI, which was on the SNES, a 16-bit cartridge system, had higher audio fidelity at points. I can only surmise Square Enix did not have a very easy time understanding the system specifications or what a CD-ROM could hold.
First sentence in, and we already have an issue. It's not the game's fault if the music comes out bad. It's most likely your television or your computer or whatever having difficulty processing whatever game system you're playing on. If you're playing on the Steam version or the PS4 version, I completely understand. Those versions sometimes have pieces of the game that are lost in translation. I play with the original PS1 version, and I have never had an issue with sound, and I use TVs from the same era this game came out. So, what's your excuse? If you're telling me you played this game when it came out, then there's no excuse. Those TVs aren't exactly the highest class televisions. They're good televisions and they do their job, so I don't see why you're having an issue unless you have a television from the 80s, in which case I don't even know how you got a PS1 to work on one of those, and I want to know your secret.
The next point is hilarious. Even entries of the series on the same system grossly surpassed it. No way! A game that released in the year 1997 has lesser qualities than the game that would release in 1999? Wow! I have nothing to say. This person has no clue how technology works. He then compares this to Final Fantasy VI, which is a good game and has softer tracks. The music in Final Fantasy VII, which has been playing in the background the whole time, uses heavy synth music and rock tones. Final Fantasy VI, however, uses a more orchestral soundtrack, thus required less work. Also, he brings up the bits again, where it doesn't matter in this situation. As for the bit about Square not knowing how the PS1 disc worked, that's not true. Final Fantasy VII was their second game on the console, the first being a game called Tobal No. 1, released on August 2nd, 1996, which was a fairly well-praised game.
Well, tragically, that's all the time I have for today. I'd love to continue talking about this, but I'm on a bit of a time crunch, and the next section is all about the characters, the story, and the gameplay. And that's going to take another 10 minutes in and of itself, so look out for a part 2, where we will talk about these things. Now, I want to round out with a bit of a closing statement here. Don't let me decide your opinions on a game like Final Fantasy VII, and certainly don't let this reviewer decide it. I don't go to review sites specifically just to look at a review and then decide not to buy the game. I look, and if there's a lot of bad reviews in comparison to the good ones, tragically, I'm going to lean more towards the bad ones. But if a game has more good reviews like Final Fantasy VII does, I'm actually going to take a chance with this game. And even then, if I see negative reviews, sometimes I do genuinely still look at the game and see what I would like about it. See, this time this person mainly talked about graphics, constantly bringing up things like bits, and those aren't important in a game, in my opinion. I mentioned it earlier, but graphics don't mean anything to me. To me, it should go story, gameplay, music, and then graphics. To me, I'd rather play a text-based game with an incredible story than something like Forza Horizon. I'm just not interested in those high caliber, graphically intense games that have nothing for me. So, anyway, this is my final thoughts here. Don't let people decide your opinions on things, and you really should check out Final Fantasy VII. You probably saw in that screenshot earlier, it's available on all kinds of devices. It's available on the PS1, it's available on your computer, you can go get it on Steam, you can go and get it on your PS4. It's an incredible game, and I hyper recommend it to you. It is awesome. You can even get it on iOS, so what are you waiting for? Go pick up Final Fantasy VII. It's incredible. I've been Theo, and I've had fun talking with you. Ciao. I'm gonna go put some pants on now.